could actually see the apartment. It didn't feel that different to dining out the back garden.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. On the 22nd of June 2020, 19 days after the quote-unquote bombshell evidence in the Madeleine McCann case, the former lead detective Goncalo Amaral sort of broke his silence, if one can call 3 weeks a silence, but he basically went on to a local television station in Portugal and gave an interview. This interview is quoted in the British tabloid The Daily Mail, and I love the way the second word in the article is the word disgraced. Okay, we're now going to talk about the other side to the McCann story, and let's introduce the person. Well, he's the disgraced police officer. So after that word, everything he says is bullshit, isn't it? Not worth listening to, because he's disgraced. So it doesn't really matter what he says. Not that the McCanns are disgraced, not that they disgraced parents or whatever, but the police officer, he's disgraced. So it's a clever little way to tell a story but invalidate it before you even tell it, isn't it? In the previous episode that I put on YouTube about the end game, I said that we shouldn't get stuck in the trees, that we miss the woods. And I'm going to take that thinking a little bit further in this episode. We want to know what this is all about, and we're actually going to get a sense of it through Amaral, and I'm going to quote from his book at the end of this episode. So just keep that thought in the back of your mind while we go through this particular article. Now, I'm very pleased that the article came out despite the attempt to sort of spin it in a way. There's also somewhere else in the article, the writers say that the detective confessed, something like he confessed that they never interviewed Brueckner. I also love that word. It's like it's almost like the detective confessed to committing a crime. The detective's guilty of something, so he's confessed. It's like a confession. So the disgraced police officer confessed, blah blah blah, and so the whole thing is, is the police officer actually the perpetrator? Is the police officer the abductor? Did the police officer commit this crime? Is the police officer the evil person in this case? Is the police officer the person responsible for Madeleine McCann getting killed, abducted, the whole thing, the whole debacle? Is the police officer being called? Can you come and investigate this case? Is he the true evil? Is he the actual criminal in this case? And just in preparing this particular episode, I went to Kate McCann's book and just Googled, did a Kindle search for Amaral, and he appears 57 times in her book. And there's also a lot of, I won't say slurs, but a lot of little digs at him whenever he's mentioned. So, for example, she'll say, "I'd barely heard of Senor Amaral." Also, from the mystifying Senor Amaral. Goncalo Amaral was removed as coordinator. His removal from the investigation, Amaral's association, all of it's negative. Amaral and his chums had evidently blah blah blah, something, taking full advantage of the lifting of judicial secrecy. I love that. I really love that from Kate McCann. She's accusing the detective of taking full advantage of the long-awaited lifting of judicial secrecy. What that means is Amaral wasn't allowed to talk about the investigation. It's kind of a unique legal prescript in Portugal where while a case is under investigation, the police may not talk about it. Actually, also, the suspects or the people at the heart of the investigation may not talk about it either. But you know what you can do? You can create this massive PR circus and your spokespeople can talk about it. And you can talk about, we're not going to talk about the investigation, but you know what, it was like dining in our backyard and putting up all of that kind of thing. And so by the time the cadaver dogs come, it's a foregone conclusion that there was a abductor, because you've been putting the story out there through friends, spokesmen, family members, and everybody else. And of course, the police can't respond because they're sworn to judicial secrecy. But who's taking full advantage of this? No, it's not the McCanns. It's not the McCanns who somehow were involved in the biggest, the most covered missing person case in history. No, it's the police. And how long did it take Amaral to respond to the latest sort of circus act? Almost 3 weeks. Meanwhile, what have the McCanns been doing on their social media, Facebook posts, spokesmen that aren't spokesmen commenting, etc.? Some other references in her book include something about Amaral's behavior. Amaral was talking more and more, even though he was gagged by the law, or he was no longer gagged by the law. Amaral's theories, Amaral's posturing, conduct of Amaral and his friends. Where's that one where she talks about tricks? Goncalo Amaral was still parading his unsavory. Was the detective parading? So this is not about the McCanns parading one witness after another. Is that not what it's about? It's about the detective parading. I mean, the Netflix documentary that came out, right? Was that not parading something? Who paraded that? For his next trick, Amaral produced a documentary. That's location 5359. Amaral's documentary was the last straw. So they sue Amaral for his documentary. They applied for an injunction against Amaral's book. And so on. I don't think there's any mention in the book that Amaral actually survived the legal assault on him and that he actually prevailed. There's nothing mentioned in their book about that. Anyway, let's go back to the Daily Mail article. I'll put a link to that in the description so you can read it yourself. As I say, it starts off with a disgraced former police officer. Oh, okay, so now we know who he is. Not a respected police officer, not the lead detective on the Madeleine McCann case. Let's start it with disgrace. And I want to also emphasize what is in it for the media taking this stand or this position. And not just the Daily Mail, pretty much all the British media take the same position. And at the end of this episode, we're going to look at the answer. What is in it for them? Why are they also taking this stand? Right? So, in the article, they describe Amaral, describing the 43-year-old German. Why don't you name him by his name? It's Christian Brueckner. So say Amaral described the 43-year-old Christian Brueckner as an almost perfect suspect. And then they go on to say he claimed last April, and I know that because I was in Pride Deluge at the time. I was writing a book at the time as well. I'm talking about 2019, April, May 2019 last year. It was very well known that Amaral was saying a German paedophile was going to be made a scapegoat. And then one was. And this was a guy called Neves. And the joke about him was that he preyed on little boys. But people thought at the time, oh, so that's the German paedophile. but it wasn't. And I'm really glad Amaral says, when I spoke last year, I was talking about the situation that's happening now. Interesting, isn't it? So Amaral predicted that this guy would be made a scapegoat. And he says he's an almost perfect suspect. All that's lacking for him to become the perfect suspect is that he's dead. Now, in the previous episode, I mentioned this scenario where couldn't you approach this perfect suspect and say, hey, wouldn't you mind if we make you the fall guy for our thing, right? And all you need to do is just say nothing, and we'll give you this. You can maybe get early release or this or that or that or the next thing. Would you mind? And is there anything else you want from us? What else? Let's make a deal here. That's something I said before this came out. Now think about this. Think about buying someone's silence in exchange for making them a scapegoat. In other words, getting them to consent to being the scapegoat, and someone being dead. If someone's dead, you don't need to buy their silence. They're already dead. Now, by the way, in the JonBenet Ramsey case, you do have exactly that. You've got a guy who was identified as having high-tech boots, and I think he had a stun gun or something like that, or a stun gun or something was found, and I think his name was David Helgoth, and he died very close to the time JonBenet Ramsey died. So it's like, well, maybe this case is solved. We just don't know because the suspect's dead. Okay, so pardon me, his name was Michael Helgoth. David Helgoth, I think, is a virtuoso pianist from Perth, Australia. Yeah, so sorry about that. So Michael Helgoth was the perfect suspect at the time with Madeleine McCann, and he died in February 1997. Let me just get the exact date. He died the 14th of February 1997, age 26, and found near his body was a stun gun and high-tech boots, and everyone was saying, well, that's him, that's the killer. And we don't really need to investigate this case because we've found our guy and he's dead, so case solved. Perfect scapegoat in that particular case. In the Daily Mail's coverage, there's I just want to quickly go through it. So besides describing Brueckner as almost the perfect suspect, he would just need to be dead, they need to be perfect. When he was asked, this is on the Portuguese television show, when Amaral was asked if he believed Brueckner was the man responsible for Madeleine's disappearance. I love the way Amaral answered this. I mean, I genuinely love the way he answered it. He doesn't say, no, I don't think it was Brueckner. Or he doesn't say, no, well, there's no evidence linking Brueckner. He doesn't say that. He says, to answer that question, it has to be proven first that an abduction took place. So he's taking you a giant step back and he's saying, but you're assuming that an abduction took place. It's kind of a slap to the face to say, why are you bringing the suspect when, why are you thinking that there's an abduction? I mean, obviously the whole McCann case hinges on, first of all, is she still alive, or did she die on May 3rd? If she died on May 3rd, all the little speculations after that disappear completely. If she is alive, then it's who abducted her, who's the abductor, is it this pedophile or that one, could she be in this country or that one or that one or that one, till the end of time. But if she died on May 3rd and she died in an apartment, all of that's gone. All of that is nonsense. And the detective is rightly saying there's no evidence of an abduction, nothing. Not a footprint, not a hair, not a DNA strand, no eyewitnesses, no direct evidence, nothing. In fact, there's more evidence to prove that she died. Of course, you can say, well, the dogs don't count as evidence and all that. I'm actually going to do another video dealing with that, just dealing with how the McCanns dealt with the cadaver dog by using case law. I'm still going to deal with that. And that's going to be very, very interesting to look at, I can assure you. In the next paragraph, they refer to the ex-cop claiming in a controversial book. Why is the book controversial? The McCann's book isn't controversial. In fact, the British media, I think, did their best to serialize the book and quote from the book and endorse the book and all that kind of thing, didn't they? And the book has got almost 1,000 reviews to date, that book. That's not a controversial book. That book about pedophiles and the McCanns themselves saying, no, we're really worried that pedophiles could be involved. And of course, it's a book that completely justifies them and implicates others. By the way, the Ramseys did the same thing. The Ramseys also wrote a book justifying themselves, implicating other people. Amanda Knox did the same thing as well. They all made tons of money out of those books, those self-justifying books. And when Amaral wrote a book, he got taken to court. No, you can't write a book. You can't have your say. And I love the way the McCanns will say, you know what, it's strange, Amaral, after he was removed from the case, he actually quit his job. Why? Because he was a shit cop. No, because he wanted freedom of speech. He would only be able to talk about this case if he wasn't a cop. He could only talk freely about the case if he wasn't a policeman. You've also got to then ask, what about all the other officers who remain policemen that couldn't talk about the case? If they did talk about the case, they'd get fired. It says something about the sense of mission of Amaral, doesn't it? So anyway, what the article refers to is, in his book, he talks about that the parents had covered up their daughter's accidental death. So he's not even accusing the McCanns of killing their child. He's just saying something happened to Madeleine by accident and they just covered it up. And he criticized their parents, saying, why are you pointing us to that person and that one and that one? And then he also criticized the police, saying, why must the police follow all the tips and suggestions of these people who ultimately became suspects? Why can't we follow our own investigation? Why are we kind of being dictated to? You tell us what to do and we'll go and do it. And something I meant to mention in a previous episode is, when you follow the narrative of the McCann story, what you see is how the McCanns take the story internationally. Jerry even goes to America. They go and see the Pope in Rome. They go to Morocco. They go to Germany. They go to the Netherlands. They go everywhere except kind of the UK. But they're everywhere kind of except in Portugal and the UK, and that they're looking for Madeleine. Could she be in Belgium? Could she be in Spain? And then what happens after 4 months? They find traces, tiny traces, that suggest it could have been Madeleine who died in the apartment. So instead of going outside apartment 5A to Morocco and all these places, far from the apartment, far even from Portugal, the McCanns are saying, look over there, let's go to Belgium. How about this? How about that sighting? And finally, they actually investigate the apartment with cadaver dogs, and the cadaver dogs seem to show an unambiguous signal that somebody died in the apartment. And that same scent was found in the rental car and on Madeleine's toy. But no, that's not evidence. Let's rather go and look for Madeleine in Australia. Amaral also accused the McCanns of abandoning their children to eat out at night and lying to Portuguese police, and said that Madeleine had been left crying for around an hour the night before she vanished. So, yeah, you have the lead detective saying, wow, the day before something happened to Madeleine where she fell by accident, Madeleine was crying for an hour. Why was she crying for an hour? Because she was left alone for an hour. And then the very next day, did Madeleine fall? And if she did fall, wasn't it because she'd been left alone for a long time? Wasn't it because someone wasn't watching her? And would someone be responsible for the care of a small little child like that? And what if, is it really an accident if someone falls and dies if the day before they've sort of been crying, where were you, and crying or something like that? It's a question. Is someone really responsible, or is it the child's fault? I've taken custody of a little puppy, and I take the little puppy for walks on a leash, and sometimes I let go of the leash and I let the puppy sort of do what it wants to do. And obviously, when I hold the leash, I'm also on the leash. In other words, when I restrain the puppy, I'm restraining the puppy, but he's also restraining me. I can't walk exactly where I want to walk. I don't have freedom of movement. And so on one particular day, I let go of the leash, and for no proper reason or no reason, the little dog just took off. He just sprinted. There was no cat or person, or just, I don't know, maybe just felt like running. But he ran about easily 100 meters up the road, and then he turned and he went around the side. And at the top of that road is a very, very busy road. And if he'd gotten onto that road, it would be seconds before he'd be run over. It's just a very, very busy artery. And my instinctual thing was, oh shit, he's dead. And that would have been my fault. It's not my fault that he ran into the road, but I should have taken care of him that didn't happen. In other words, held onto the leash. So that little puppy, if he had been run over, it would have been an accident, but not completely an accident, because I should have been holding his leash. And in the McCann case, I don't think the McCanns killed Madeleine, but how did that accident happen? I'm just comparing it to my situation with the puppy and asking, could it have been something similar? And what if the day before I'd done exactly the same thing? I'd let the leash go and the dog ran around the corner and the same sort of thing happened, and then I'd do it again. Is it then an accident? If we go back to the Daily Mail article, it refers to a lengthy legal battle against Amaral in 2008, suing him for defamation. Now, what I love about the British press is they don't say what the outcome of that was, which was that they initially won their lawsuit, then they lost it. The McCanns lost the appeal, then they lost the appeal to the Supreme Court. Then it was escalated to the European Court of Human Rights, and we don't know what the result of that is, but I would imagine if the result was in their favor, everyone would know about it. Isn't that true? When the McCanns won their first lawsuit against the disgraced Portuguese detective, didn't everybody know that? Didn't everyone know he was disgraced and that they won their lawsuit and, blah, 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 blah. But do you see what I'm getting at? So there's a legal narrative, and then there's also the media narrative, and the media narrative is totally different. It's also like the legal police narrative compared to the abduction narrative that was going on at the same time, that the police didn't support. The police didn't say, yeah, we think there's an abductor. Who thought there was an abductor from the word go? Not the police. Who told the police there was an abductor? The McCanns and the McCanns' friends. The police didn't say, yeah, this looks like it could be an abduction. In fact, the police said, it doesn't look like an abduction. So in the same article, they've got to mention that this former police chief was removed from the inquiry after criticising British police. Is that why he got removed? Because he criticised British police. What did he criticise them for? Well, wasn't it because he said, why are you only following the leads that are what the McCann suggest? Why are you only following an abductor scenario? And if that's the case, isn't that criticism justified? So I'm going to deal with that aspect in a little bit more detail, as I say, at the end of this episode, which is in a couple of minutes. What is really interesting in this particular article is that, and we wouldn't know this otherwise, is that Amaral talks about the photos of Christian Brueckner's vehicle is different to the photos that he saw. He said there were distinctive minion-style characters painted around the front and sides. And it was obviously something the police investigated at the time, but then they saw no reason to take it further. And I love how people come 13 years after the fact and say, oh, why didn't you investigate this guy? Well, they did. And then they moved on to other guys. Why did they move on to other guys? Well, they were told, well, can you investigate this suspect? How about that one? How about that one? How about that one? How about that one? And anyone you don't investigate, you're in trouble for not investigating, because someone else is calling the shots. And the Ramseys have done the same thing. The Ramseys have also said, we're very upset with the Boulder police because they didn't investigate this person, or this one, or that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. But they did. They just didn't take it further because the person had an alibi or whatever the thing was. I mean, a good example is John Mark Carr. Should he be investigated further if he wasn't even in Boulder when the crime happened? Anyway, Amaral makes a good point, and he says the van with these minion characters on it, you really think people wouldn't have noticed it? I mean, people would have noticed that van anyway, but do you really think they wouldn't have noticed it with minion characters like that on it? You don't often have a vehicle with clear cartoon characters kind of circling the vehicle. Anyone would recognize something like that, wouldn't they? And yet in all the information about Madeleine McCann, I don't remember virtually anything regarding a vehicle other than the vehicle belonging to the McCanns. There's virtually nothing about a vehicle. There's a little bit about Murat's vehicle, but Murat's vehicle was searched. They didn't find anything. And as far as I know, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, they also did search Brueckner's vehicle at the time, didn't they? And they didn't find anything. One thing that's, for me, an excellent point is this thing where he's asked, what is the problem? You know, the German authorities want to re-examine all the DNA evidence. Why can't they? Why is that a problem? Are you trying to hide something? Do you feel insecure that the Portuguese are inferior to other agencies? Now, can you imagine you being asked that? Is the reason you don't want to give this up because you actually feel insecure that your standards are worse? You are lesser police than your European counterparts. Can't you let someone who's smarter and cleverer and has higher standards do it? Oh, no, that's fine. Okay, sorry. Yeah, you go and take over the case. We're too stupid to do it. And so he's asked, why don't you want to give up the evidence? And he says, well, they did actually test the saliva sample, and it came from apparently a baby that was being fed mother's milk, staying in the apartment. Doesn't that make sense? It's a saliva sample. Where else would it come from? And then he also says, the actual reason why you don't really want to give the case over to the German authorities is, quote, it enables them to have jurisdiction over this case. I don't know what the German angle is here, to be quite honest. I don't know what the German angle is in terms of the working with the British or whatever is going on. But obviously the Portuguese don't seem to like the idea of them getting jurisdiction. But it is interesting that somebody wants jurisdiction over the McCann case. And isn't it to flush the case away, or to make the case go either up in flames or to go where they want it to go? And I agree with Amaral when he says, I think the Portuguese police and the authorities can do anything here in the laboratories that they can do in Germany. I agree. You should actually read Amaral's book if you can. It's quite a sophisticated narrative with some sophisticated reasoning and rationalizing. And we're going to refer to his book in a second. The article concludes just saying that it's Amaral's first interview, and the last time he's spoken about the case was in December when he appeared on Spanish TV. You've got this cacophony of the McCann circus. It's a pity you don't hear more from Amaral. It's a pity you don't get more out of him, because he is like a voice of reason as far as I'm concerned. He is someone who presents another side of the story, and certainly in the sense of this jurisdiction thing, things that you might not necessarily things that might not necessarily occur to you. And speaking of things that might not necessarily occur to you, I want to quote something from Amaral's book. And here's a disclaimer. I'm not saying this is my view. I'm not saying that this is what I believe. I'm simply quoting what Amaral's saying. So in his book, he talks about fraud or abuse of trust. And I'm quoting now from his book. He says, during a more relaxed moment at one of these meetings, and he's referring to meetings, police meetings with the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária investigating the McCann case. He's saying during kind of a relaxed moment at one of the meetings, he made an ill-judged comment. So he just spoke his mind. He said it was inopportune or undiplomatic, to simply off the cuff, and he said, but this was his reasoning, quote, thinking about the kinds of crime that may have been committed if the McCanns were involved in their daughter's disappearance, something occurs to me. If they were involved in one way or another, then a crime of fraud or abuse of trust is a possibility concerning the fund that was set up to finance the search for Madeleine. Donations have reached nearly 3 million euros, and that's obviously at the time of writing. It has since gone up to many multiples of that number. So what he's actually saying here is that if the McCanns were involved, and note, even he's saying if. He's not saying for sure they were involved. He's simply saying if they were involved in their daughter's disappearance, then going and starting a search for Madeleine fund and making a website and writing books and making documentaries and raising money and asking for money from the public and selling ribbons and bands and all the fundraising and all of that, if they knowingly had something to do with their daughter's disappearance and they knowingly started this fund, Amaral's saying, well, that's also a crime of fraud or abuse of trust. And just think about this. If Amaral has a point, if Amaral's right about this, and imagine if you could prosecute this possibility, then if the possibility is, if there's some merit to this possibility, the result of that could be that someone would have to give back all the money that they fraudulently sought from the public either to investigate someone who they knew didn't need to be investigated because she'd never disappeared, or they knew what had happened. So in other words, money raised fraudulently would have to be given back. And not only that, what about the British media that were also raising money on their behalf and also making money on this whole thing of Madeleine, what's happened to Madeleine? And one has also got to ask, did the media really not know that Madeleine wasn't dead? Because if the media did know, then they'd also be guilty of fraud and abuse of trust. I'm talking about the media would be complicit. And doesn't it sort of make sense that in the biggest, the most heavily covered missing person case in history, isn't it the most heavily covered because it's kind of unresolvable, but also something else is going on? People are said to make money not from finding Madeleine, but from not finding her. From the story of not finding Madeleine. Just a question, something to maybe think about. The second paragraph I think is even more interesting, where Amaral says, if such a crime exists, and note he's not saying this is definitely happening, he's saying, he's being very careful, he's saying, if this is the case, if this is happening, if there is fraud, Portugal wouldn't have jurisdiction to investigate and try it. It would have nothing to do with Portugal. It would have nothing to do with him. The fund being legally registered in England, it would be our English colleagues who would deal with the case. And this is something that he just brings up kind of flippantly at a kind of a relaxed meeting. And he says, our English colleagues, meaning I guess English cops, then realize a hard reality. The strong possibility that they would have a crime to investigate in their own country, with the McCann couple as the main suspects. And this is what he's saying here is there's a crime of fraud in Britain perpetrated by the McCanns, not by an abductor, not by someone else weaving the magic PR wand, the McCanns. And he says, wow, the prospect of that doesn't appeal to them, which is quite a understatement, I think. He says, I notice a sudden pallor in the faces of those British people present. And as I understand it, just following this comment, that Amaral was thrown off the case. And what did the British media say? He criticized the English cops or something, the British investigators. They didn't say anything about this. And then you look at this particular article in the Daily Mail and you say, it's quite interesting that from beginning to end there's this sort of clever little invalidation of the detective. He's disgraced. Right, let's establish that right in the beginning. Let's talk about him writing a controversial book and being sued, but not the result of that. It's a nice second little point that we scored there. We'll also mention that he was removed as the head of the inquiry, but we won't really say why. We'll use this nice little word, confessing. That's a great little one. So when he was asked, did you guys actually investigate Brueckner? He confessed that they didn't. He said, well, at the time we knew that he was a paedophile. He confessed that. So, I mean, he's guilty, isn't he? He's guilty of, because he confessed. People confess to things they're guilty of. So I do have to wonder, all the money that was raised to search for Madeleine. Now, imagine if you are responsible for all this. So let's imagine a scenario where Madeleine isn't missing, and let's say her name's actually Tracy. Tracy's not missing. Tracy's died, and you are Tracy's guardian in whatever capacity, and you start up a fund to look for Tracy, but you know that Tracy's not missing. You know that there doesn't even need to be an investigation. Now you get money for that. You get money to look for Tracy, but you know Tracy doesn't need to be found. What are you going to spend that money on? I mean, you would know that it's a waste spending money to have someone actually on the ground searching. Obviously, if you genuinely believe Tracy was missing, that would make the most sense. It's literally have people searching for her, searching over countryside, right? That almost never happened in the Madeleine McCann case. You sort of never had organized searches the way we've seen in the Gannon Store case and that kind of thing. Why not spend money on that? On the other hand, as I say, if you know that Tracy's definitely dead and you're getting all this money, you're getting millions, well, why not spend that money on more fundraising and also on things that you can, you sort of continue to promote the search, and then you make more money. So you spend more money on marketing and promoting and selling wristbands. And if you've got enough money in the pot eventually, why not then start making documentaries and really get your message out? And if you really got a lot of money, why not make a Netflix documentary about how to find Tracy, and also why you're not involved? I mean, you didn't do it. Tracy is alive and well, you know. The other side of it is, if you put that pot of money somewhere and you're going to use it, and anything ever happens and the case blows up, you're going to have to give the money back. But what if you've spent the money not on building a house, but on building a house of cards, building a representation? What if that has happened with Tracy? Food for thought, perhaps. Okay, and that about wraps up what I wanted to touch on today. Basically, all just from one article from the Mail Online. Like I've mentioned in the previous episode, I'm working on a narrative, Beach of Light, where I just want to put the whole evolution of the media narrative together from June 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so on, and then just look at how it evolves. And obviously, it sort of culminates in the detective stepping forward and saying, well, you'd have to assume there was an abduction. Was there an abduction? What is certainly kind of new in the McCann story is the fairly aggressive announcements that Madeleine's dead. That's definitely interesting. For me, it's not surprising that the McCanns are denying that or resistant to that. But that's definitely a new feature in the McCann circus, is the story that, well, it actually looks like Madeleine was murdered. Previously, it was she was abducted, but she's fine. Previously, she was abducted by a paedophile or a gang of paedophiles, but you know what? She's actually living happily ever after. She's fine. Now, I'm sure she's safe and well, and one day we'll see her again. I will probably be doing one last episode on YouTube on the McCanns for the foreseeable future, and as I say, that is dealing with how at the time that they were suspects in September 2007, how they kind of seemed to sort of dig themselves out of the implications and the assumptions and speculations that were going on at the time. And it's quite simple how they did that. They basically just cast doubt on the reliability of cadaver dogs. Cadaver dogs just aren't reliable, which means, so that's not true, thus we're innocent, thus there was an abductor. And in the next episode, I'm going to be showing you how they came up with that narrative then. And it didn't age well, I can tell you that now. Thank you for listening. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Make sure you get a lot of sleep, look after your immunity, eat well, and I'll see you guys next time.